Erik then mustered the courage to speak, his voice thick with remorse. "Anya, every day I lived with that secret. I feared it would destroy us if you ever learned the truth. I believed that by hiding my true identity, I was sparing you the pain and dishonor of a legacy I never chose. I was wrong. I see that now, as your hurt is as real as the love we once shared." His eyes, red-rimmed with unshed tears, searched mine for any sign of forgiveness. Please listen to the audio story with me. I had decided to spend the rainy Saturday tidying up the attic, a cramped but cherished space that had long been overlooked, filled with boxes of forgotten mementos and relics from family history. I usually found solace there among the dust-coated photo albums and yellowed newspapers. That afternoon, as droplets patterned lightly on the window pane, I ascended the creaking, narrow staircase, my footsteps echoing in the silence. There, between crates of antique costume jewelry and faded letters bundled together in fragile ribbons, something unusual caught my eye. It was an envelope, old and slightly tattered. The paper bore a delicate, almost imperceptible hue of sepia, and its edges were worn as if it had been handled countless times by anxious hands. I remember leaning over a sturdy trunk, my eyes squinted in concentrated curiosity as I delicately lifted the envelope. My heart skipped a beat as I turned it over, running my fingertips along the faded, elegant script that sealed its mysterious contents. With a slow, trembling motion, I broke the fragile seal and carefully unfolded the letter inside. At first, I read with the detached, analytical mind of an architect inspecting blueprints, but soon I felt the weight of every penned word seeping into my core. The ink, though softened by time, marked heartfelt confessions and regret that seemed to speak in a language older than our current lives. My eyes widened, my eyebrows rose in astonishment, and for several agonizing seconds time itself appeared to slow. The initial surge of curiosity was quickly replaced by shock. My lips parted in silent disbelief, and I clutched the letter as though it were a lifeline. In that concentrated moment, every meticulously designed detail of my life began to blur each memory, each expectation, all now tainted with the bitter possibility of hidden truths. I could still picture the exact moment I read the first few lines. There are truths buried in the silence of our hearts, secrets that weigh heavily upon us like the stone of a forgotten monument. The poetic cadence of the message sent tremors of uncertainty down my spine. My mind raced. Was this a confession, a plea for understanding, or perhaps a carefully concealed act of betrayal meant to protect someone else's honor? Every possibility spun a web of trepidation and intrigue. Returning downstairs, I tried to reassemble the shattered pieces of my evening, like the careful restoration of an old building. Over a cup of tea in the quiet of our living room, my mind replayed the words of the letter as if they were architectural blueprints that held the key to an unknown part of my heritage. I felt a persistent pull, a call to dig deeper into the neglected corners of my family's past. My intuition, honed by years of designing structures, now guided me towards a more personal excavation, the secret buried within my own bloodline. In the early morning hours, as the city stirred to life beneath a soft haze, I finally mustered the courage to retrieve the letter again. My fingers brushed over the faded script, and I resolved that I could no longer ignore the call of truth. This discovery, painful as it was, promised not only betrayal and heartbreak, but also the possibility of understanding, of facing the uncertain future with eyes unclouded by deception. I reached out to Lena, my closest friend and a sharp journalist, whose relentless pursuit of truth had often illuminated the darkest corners of society. I remember dialing her number with an urgency that surprised even me. "Lena, you wouldn't believe what I found," I said, my voice trembling with a mix of excitement and apprehension. Even though I offered minimal details, her curiosity spiked instantly, and I could almost feel her determination to help me untangle this mystery. Her warm, encouraging tone promised both support and the promise of uncovering facts that might well be buried deeper than I could imagine. As I ended the call, my mind swirled with questions. Who was the mysterious figure hinted at in the letter? Could this secret, hidden away for so long, be the mother of every doubt I had silently harbored about my family, and most chilling of all, had my quiet, comfortable life been built on lies. The letter felt like the first tremor of an impending earthquake, one that would shake the very core of everything I believed in. Even now, as I write these words by the soft glow of dawn, I feel the echo of that fateful afternoon. The letter's gentle, sorrowful script still haunts me, a delicate refrain that promises both revelation and heartbreak. My journey has just begun, and while the promise of truth is intoxicating, it comes with the bitter tang of betrayal. I stand at the threshold of a mystery that could redefine my identity, challenging the very foundation of what I thought was an unblemished family history. In that quiet moment of introspection, I resolved to follow the clues with the same passion I apply when designing a building, each detail a crucial element in the overall structure of the truth. Though my heart aches with the weight of potential secrets, I know that understanding the past is the only way to shape a future that is both authentic and liberating. And so armed with nothing but a fragile letter and an unrelenting curiosity, I step forward into the unknown, determined to reclaim my narrative and rebuild the life I believed I had perfectly constructed. Armed with Lena's encouragement and my own mounting anxiety, I ventured into a part of Berlin I rarely explored. Quiet cafes tucked away in narrow lanes, where time seemed to halt amid the clink of porcelain and hushed conversations. There, I arranged a meeting with a man whose name had surfaced in whispers from my childhood, Mr. Klaus, an elderly recluse known in fleeting gossip for his cryptic knowledge of Helena's past. I remember the chill of that gray morning as I stepped into the antiquated tea room, its decor a blend of faded elegance and time-worn secrets. He sat in a shadowed corner, his eyes narrow and suspicious as he regarded me. The air was thick with the scent of old books and even older regrets. "Miss Anya," he began in a low, measured tone, "I understand you seek the truth your mother tried so desperately to hide." His words, weighed down by recollection, sent a shiver down my spine. With deliberate care, he recounted fragmented details, hints of a romance that preceded Helena's marriage, a passionate liaison that had once filled her life with forbidden hope. There was a man, he murmured, whose presence in Helena's life was both a blessing and a curse, a secret that would forever alter the course of your family. His gaze dropped momentarily, sorrow etched upon his lined face, and for a moment I forgot the biting Berlin wind outside. His only clue was an ambiguous reference to a name spoken like the privy murmur of a long-lost memory. I left the tea room with a head swirling with questions and a creeping certainty that this secret was intricately woven into the fabric of our family. Back in my apartment, my nights grew restless. I pored over old photographs and letters, piecing together scraps of a life that had long ago been compartmentalized in Helena's carefully curated existence. I discovered images of a younger Helena, her eyes alight with a forbidden joy, and a mysterious man whose face I couldn't easily place in the mosaic of my recollections. Each discovery was both beautiful and terrible, a portrait of passion hidden beneath layers of formality and silence. I began to realize that my mother's perfect image was nothing more than a facade, constructed from carefully chosen lies to shelter us all from a painful truth. The days blurred together as I arranged a confrontation. I could no longer be content with chasing shadows. I needed answers. That afternoon, I found Helena in our family parlor, seated regally in the sunlight that streamed through the tall windows. The room, filled with mementos of glories past and family portraits in heavy frames, suddenly felt like a theater stage for an imminent tragedy. My heartbeat pounded in my ears as I approached her. "Mother," I said, my voice uncharacteristically firm despite the tremor beneath it, "I need to know your truth." I met her gaze, searching for the warmth I once thought was unassailable. Instead, I saw fear and regret dance behind her practiced composure. For a long moment, silence reigned between us, broken only by the distant hum of city life. Her eyes, usually so controlled, grew distant as she slowly began, "Anya, there are things you aren't ready to understand." But I pressed on, my voice softer, yet insistent. "I believe I am mother. I found the letter in the attic. I know some secrets have been buried, and it's time they were brought into the light." Helena's face softened into an expression of vulnerability that I had never seen before. Tears welled in her eyes as she whispered the truth of her past, a confession that her heart had once belonged to a man who was not your father. "I loved him," she admitted in a shaky tone, with a passion that defied all reason. But that love was as dangerous as it was intoxicating. I chose security over wild passion. I chose the life I believed was right for you. I buried that part of myself, believing that silence was my only salvation. Her voice broke, letting the sorrow and regret spill out like a long-dammed river. I stood there, torn between empathy and fury. The betrayal felt immeasurably more profound than I could have imagined. But as I absorbed the confession, my thoughts began to stray back to another unsettling detail, a growing suspicion regarding Erik, the man I trusted with my heart. His behavior had become increasingly erratic, his once calm demeanor laced with shadows of dread that I could barely decipher. That very evening, while the conversation with my mother left me trembling, yet resolute, I returned to our shared apartment feeling the weight of two colliding worlds. I found Erik in his study, ostensibly working by the soft glow of his desk lamp, yet his hands trembled as he rifled through old folders. The sight sent a renewed shock through me. His usually tranquil eyes darted away the moment our gazes met, and he clammed up as I stepped closer. "Erik," I began slowly, "I have more questions. Questions that need honest answers." I recalled the photograph I had seen earlier in a hidden drawer, a faded image of a young Erik standing with an older man whose cold, calculating eyes belied a lifetime of secrets. The photograph tucked away among forgotten mementos bore a cryptic caption, a bond that defied time. His face went pale and his hands stilled in mid-motion. "Anya, he stuttered, but I cut him off. "Tell me what I did not tell me. How are you connected to all of this?" My voice, though tremulous, carried the weight of betrayal and desperate need for truth. Erik's eyes filled with an emotion I could neither name nor reconcile. For a moment, his posture sagged under the pressure of confession. "I didn't want to hurt you," he finally murmured, barely audible over the pounding of my heart. His words, though few, unveiled a secret that threatened to crumble the very foundation of our life together. I recalled the glimpse of recognition in Mr. Klaus's words and the memories of Helena's haunted eyes as she told me of her past. Now the realization struck me like a lightning bolt. The man who had once been so vital to my life was part of a secret that spanned generations. In the following silence, every ticking second felt like an eternity. I paced the cold, narrow halls of our apartment, replaying snippets of conversation in my mind. The anger and sorrow were intertwined, pulling me in conflicting directions. I wondered if trust, a trust I had always extended so willingly, could now survive this intergenerational betrayal. My mind raced with images of the warm evenings we once shared, now tainted with shadows of deception. Later that night, as I sat alone by the rain-streaked window, I allowed myself a moment to process the magnitude of it all. The rhythmic drip of the rain mirrored the steady pacing of my thoughts, each drop a painful reminder of a truth that refused to be hidden any longer. In that private solitude, I realized that my investigation was no longer just about understanding a secret from the past. It was about reclaiming my own identity. Everything I once held dear had been built on foundations of carefully hidden lies, and unearthing them, however painful, was the only path to freedom. Yet in the midst of the betrayal, I could still sense a fragile ember of hope. Lena's supportive words echoed in my mind, encouraging me to embrace the truth, however ugly it might be. I resolved then that I would press on, determined to piece together every fragment of Helena's mysterious past, and if necessary, demand further answers from Erik. The path ahead was shrouded in darkness, but every step was a step toward reclaiming the narrative of my life. I arranged another meeting with Lena, a quiet evening over coffee in a little bistro along the Spree. Between sips, I recounted everything that had transpired. Lena listened intently before asking, "Why do you think Erik would keep such a devastating secret about himself?" Her incisive question drove me into a contemplative silence. My mind replayed every furtive glance, every moment of hesitation he exhibited. I recalled the photograph from his study that now loomed over every whispered memory. Was it possible that his connection to Helena's past was deeper than I had imagined? That his very existence was intertwined with the secret he had helped bury? The intensity of my thoughts forced me to consider even the unthinkable, that perhaps our life had been entangled in a web of deceit long before even the letter was found. The realization was almost too agonizing to bear. I knew now that uncovering the truth about my mother's forbidden love was only a part of the equation. There was another, far more insidious connection tying Erik to that past. Determined to confront this new frontier of betrayal, I gathered my courage and called Erik the next morning. With the first light of day creeping through our curtains, I found him in the kitchen making tea in silent routine. "Erik," I said softly but firmly, "I need to know what don't you want me to know about your past, about your connection to Mama's secret?" His hands froze mid-motion, and for a long, unbearable moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, his eyes met mine, a kaleidoscope of sorrow, confusion, and something akin to resignation. His response was low and riddled with guilt. "Anya," he began, voice heavy with regret, "there are things in my past that I never thought would harm us. I always believed that some secrets were best left undisturbed, hidden away for your own protection." His words were a desperate attempt to justify the unspoken truth that connected him to the secret his mother had once kept hidden. I could see the lines of pain etched deep into his face, lines that I had never noticed before now, drawn sharply in the early morning gloom. I pressed on my voice barely above a whisper, but with an iron resolve. "But why? How can I trust you if you withhold the truth about who you are? How can I build a future with someone who hides such vital parts of your identity?" Each word felt heavy, laden with betrayal, and the hope that forgiveness might someday be born from this raw truth. In that moment, the facade of our carefully constructed life crumbled, replaced by a labyrinth of deceit and hidden legacies. I realized that my journey into the depths of my family's secrets was far from over. The revelations had not only exposed a past of forbidden passion and hidden regrets, but had also cast a stark, unyielding light on the man I thought I knew as my husband. My heart ached with the dual sting of lost trust and the growing determination to understand every dark corner of this intergenerational mystery. As I watched Erik retreat into silence, I knew that for both our sakes and for the sake of unraveling the tangled threads of our family history, I had no other choice but to continue seeking the truth. The seismic shift in my perception, the shuddering realization that my past was entwined with my present in ways I had never imagined, propelled me forward into a future that was at once terrifying and somehow liberating. Standing on the precipice of this newly revealed truth, I felt both broken and oddly empowered. The knowledge that my mother's confessions and Erik's stealthy evasions were intertwined in a single narrative of betrayal was a bitter pill to swallow. Yet it also lit a spark of defiance in me, an inner resolve to reclaim the fragments of my life, to rebuild from the ruins of a trust once held sacred. In the days that followed, I dedicated every waking moment to understanding the full scope of this secret. I revisited old diaries, reread the confessional letter with fresh eyes, and searched for any clue that might unravel the mystery behind the man my mother once loved, and the dark connection that now tethered Erik to that lost past. Each new discovery was a painful step further into an abyss of revelation, yet it was a necessary pilgrimage for a woman desperate to rebuild her identity from shattered myths. Every conversation with Lena, every clandestine meeting with someone who had glimpsed fragments of the long-forgotten history brought me closer to the undeniable truth. I was living in the echo of secrets, a family legacy where betrayal, love, and hidden sins converged on a common ground. And as much as the pain threatened to overwhelm me, I knew I could not retreat. The path of truth, however perilous, was the only path toward forgiveness, healing, and ultimately freedom. Even as the final light of day faded into twilight, I resolved with quiet determination that I would no longer allow the past to dictate my future. Each revelation, no matter how shattering, was an invitation to rebuild not just a family history of lies, but the very foundations of my own life. And so, with weary resolve and a burning need for answers, I stepped deeper into the darkness of our hidden legacy, determined to emerge into the light no matter the cost. This was the beginning of an unraveling that threatened to redefine everything I once believed about love, loyalty, and self. And as I forged ahead, heart heavy yet defiant, I understood that the only way forward was to confront the spectral betrayals of yesterday and reclaim the narrative of today. The journey into truth was perilous, but it was one I could no longer avoid, and in that painful clarity I found my first true step toward redemption. I thought I had seen the darkest corners of my family's history, but nothing could have prepared me for the revelation that awaited on that cold, drizzly evening. The clues had been mounting like a whispered chorus in my mind, the disquieting photograph of Erik with an older, unnamed man, the cryptic hints from Mr. Klaus, and the fragmented confessions of my mother that I had barely begun to understand. Now, with a single document clutched in my trembling hand, a faded, handwritten letter, I discovered in a hidden compartment in our study, the horrifying twist demanded to be seen in the full light of day. I had spent sleepless nights piecing together every scrap of evidence. While sorting through a box of old mementos that Erik kept locked away in a desk drawer, I found this letter tucked between yellowed newspaper clippings and forgotten receipts. The letter, penned in careful looping script that belonged unmistakably to my mother Helena, had been addressed not to me but to a man whose name I could not quite decipher at first. As I read on the words slowly unfurled the secret like a forbidden map, the man I had always assumed was nothing more than an echo of a past love was, in fact, not only my mother's once cherished lover, but the biological father of the man I had built my life around. I still remember how my heart hammered against my ribcage as I deciphered the lines. In another life, we shared a passion so fierce it defied all convention. Know this, my love, that you are the testament to our defiant hearts, and through you, a part of me lives on secretly intertwined with destiny. The realization struck me like a physical blow. Erik, my Erik, the man who had held my hand in the soft glow of twilight, who had promised me a future built on honesty and care, was the son of Helena's secret love. Every moment in our quiet home, every tender conversation, and every half-smile now was saturated with a betrayal of cosmic proportions. I sank to my knees on the cold hardwood floor of our living room, the letter trembling in my grasp as though it were the very nerve of the betrayal. I had always believed that the truth, once brought to light, had the power to set us free. But now it felt like the truth was a weight around my neck, dragging me into a whirlpool of heartbreak and disillusionment. I needed answers, and I needed them now. Determined, I called Lena. Over the phone, my voice trembled. Lena, I found something I can't explain. It's about Erik, about my entire family. Her warm, steady tone was a lifeline pulling me back from the edge of despair. Meet me at our usual spot, she urged. We need every detail if we're to understand this monstrosity. The cafe where I met Lena was dimly lit and nearly empty that evening. The murmur of distant conversations blended with the soft clinking of cups. I laid the letter on the table between us. Lena's eyes widened as she scanned the faded script. This isn't just a confession, Anya, she murmured almost inaudibly. It's a revelation of identity, a truth that pierces the heart of everything we believed about this family. I recounted how every piece of evidence now aligned like a dark constellation. Erik has known all along, I said, my voice choked by both loathing and sorrow. He used our love, our shared life, to bury his origins, to hide the fact that his bloodline is tangled with the one my mother desperately tried to conceal. Lena reached across the table, gripping my hand firmly. Sometimes secrets are used as shields by parents, by lovers, even by those who think they're protecting someone. But the truth has a way of demanding to be seen. Armed with Lena's support, I resolved to confront the two pillars of my world, Erik and Helena. I set the stage for the ultimate reckoning one chilly evening when the house lay silent save for the distant city hum outside. I first sought out Erik. I found him in our study, the warm glow of his desk lamp painting his face with sorrow and guilt. I stood before him, the letter words still burning in my mind. Erik. I demanded softly, I need you to tell me the truth. Who are you? What part have you played in this deception? His gaze dropped, and for a long, agonizing moment the only sound was my racing heartbeat. Finally, he spoke in a shuddering whisper. Anya, I never wanted to hurt you. I always knew. I knew who I was, and I hid it because I was scared. Scared of the fallout, scared of losing you, scared of the shame that my beginnings might bring upon your family. His voice faltered as tears welled in his eyes. My father, he isn't the man I grew up believing he was. He's the man from your mother's past. I discovered the truth at a young age, and I chose not to chase after it because I thought if I embraced the life I built with you, maybe I could outrun it. He confessed his words trembling like fragile glass. The cold shock of his admission splintered everything I'd believed about trust and loyalty. Every tender memory of his smile, every night we spent wrapped in each other's arms now felt irrevocably stained by lies. My voice was barely a whisper as I asked, why did you let me believe in a lie? How could you let this secret fester while we built a life together? Erik's eyes met mine, filled with an anguish that mirrored my own despair. I thought I was protecting you, he said, voice cracking with regret. I thought if I buried the truth, it wouldn't hurt. I was wrong. Every day I lived with that decision, a decision that cost me the trust and love of the woman I care about most. That confrontation with Erik was a bitter, jagged pill I was forced to swallow. But the night was far from over. I then sought out Helena in the solitude of our family parlor, where generations of portraits silently bore witness to the legacy of our lineage. There, subdued by regret and aching sorrow, she was seated in the quiet afterglow of a long day. Mother, I began, voice laced with heartbreak. I know everything. I know about your past, about the man you once loved, and now I understand that he is the father of my husband. Helena's petrified expression transformed into a cascade of grief. For a long while, she could only stare at me as if seeing the shattered fragments of her loyalties. Finally, her voice emerged in a soft, broken tone. Anya, I never thought I'd have to face the consequences of that life again. I did what I thought was best for you, for our family, by choosing silence. Her eyes filled with unshed tears, and in that moment I saw a vulnerability long concealed beneath her icy countenance. But Mother, I insisted, my words trembling with anguish, your silence cost me more than I ever imagined. I trusted you implicitly, trusted our family's story, the integrity of our lives, and now I see that story was built on deceit. How can I move forward when everything I believed in has been a lie? For a time, our words merely hovered in the heavy air, mingling with memories of former happiness and now unspoken remorse. In Helena's trembling silence, I glimpsed the painful dichotomy of a mother torn between protecting her loved ones and shielding herself from a past that refused to remain buried. That night, as the rain began to patter softly against our windows, I sat alone in the quiet of our home. The confession of both Helena and Erik left me reeling in a vortex of betrayal and sorrow. I felt as though the very foundations of my universe were crumbling, eroding away beneath the weight of a truth that was as brutal as it was undeniable. Trust, the very lifeblood of every promise and every dream, had been splintered into a million shards. Yet amidst the despair, a part of me understood that there could be no reclaiming of what was lost, except by facing this new reality head-on. The revelation of Erik's true lineage was not a random twist of fate, but a puzzle piece in a long-forgotten miniature of our family's tragic narrative. It explained the flickers of dissonance in our lives, the moments when a look, a hesitation, a half-spoken word had hinted at something far more complicated. And while the hurt seemed insurmountable, it also beckoned me to rebuild a future that, despite the betrayal, could be forged from honesty and understanding. In the deep silence of the night, as I sat in the flickering glow of my lamp, I made a choice. I would not let this revelation shatter me completely. Instead, I would allow it to become the catalyst for rebuilding my sense of self. I realized that every human heart carries its own labyrinth of secrets and scars. And while this secret had been an unyielding blow to my trust, it also offered me a glimpse into the complexity of our existence. Forgiveness might seem impossible now, but perhaps in time, understanding could emerge from the ashes of betrayal. The aftermath of that night was a relentless tide of introspection, each memory of shared laughter and tender moments now interlaced with bitterness. I struggled daily with the shadow of Erik's secret, with the realization that the person I had given my love and trust to was not defined solely by the tenderness he displayed in our quiet home. His identity, marred by a deception he had kept hidden for years, was a reminder that the past, no matter how deeply buried, always has the power to claw its way back into our lives. In the weeks that followed, I found myself wandering the familiar streets of Berlin, alone each corner, a reminder of happier times. The city, vibrant yet scarred by its own history, seemed to echo the turmoil in my heart. I would pause on bridge railings overlooking the Spree, contemplating the nature of truth and forgiveness. The revelation had transformed my understanding of betrayal. It was not always the result of malice, but sometimes the tragic outcome of fear, a fear so potent that it drove loved ones to hide behind facades and half-truths. There were many nights when I talked to myself, questioning the very notion of identity. Had I been naive to trust the carefully constructed narratives of our past? Was it possible, or even desirable, to dissect every lie in the hope of finding some clarity in these moments of raw vulnerability? I began to see that our lives were not defined by a single sin or a single secret, but by the sum of all our choices, both good and bad. Every time I revisited the letter, every time I saw Erik's pained eyes or felt the tremor in my mother's voice, I was reminded that while we all have our secrets, some are more devastating than others. And as I embarked on the painful task of reconciling the woman I loved with the profound betrayal that had been inflicted, I understood that healing was a long and jagged journey. I would have to learn to rebuild my trust, not in the ideal of perfection, but in the flawed, often painful reality of human connection. At last I resolved that the truth, as excruciating as it was, must be embraced if I were to live any honest day henceforth. The path to forgiveness, if it were even possible, lay through the acceptance of the tangled web of our family's legacy. I would continue to search for the remnants of a past that defined us, but also forge new beginnings from the painful lessons learned. The twist of that fateful revelation had irrevocably altered the blueprint of my life. Yet even as I struggled under the heavy burden of betrayal, a small ember of resolve flickered inside me. I would strive to understand what made us so painfully human, our capacity to love, to hurt, and ultimately to hope. Though the echoes of this secret would forever shape the contours of my existence, I knew that by reclaiming my narrative through truth, I might someday find a way to forgive, and to build a future that, however imperfect, would be wholly my own. In that uncertain twilight between what was lost and what might still be salvaged, I learned that every story, no matter how twisted, holds the possibility of redemption. And perhaps in time I too could learn to forgive the myriad of sins that bound us, transform the pain into strength, and emerge not unscathed, but wiser. The face of betrayal was etched deeply in my heart, but it was in the acceptance of that scar that I began the long, painful journey toward healing. A journey whose destination, though veiled in uncertainty, promised the quiet, steadfast light of a reclaimed truth. I remember the night vividly, a chill in the air and the steady patter of rain against our window that seemed to echo the rhythm of despair in my heart. I knew that by this time the truths I had uncovered could no longer be buried under the weight of silence. The betrayal had fractured my life into pieces, the secret that my mother Helena had guarded for decades, and the revelation that my husband Erik was a living testimony to that hidden past. I realized I needed to confront both of them, not merely for my own sake, but to reclaim the narrative of my life. I arranged for a final confrontation on a late autumn evening. I transformed our family parlor, a room lined with ancestral portraits and heirlooms that whispered of generations past, into an arena for truth. The air was heavy with anticipation as I waited in the dim light cast by a solitary floor lamp. Every detail of the room, the polished wood of the table, the reflections dancing on the antique mirror, mirrored the layered complexity of our family history. Tonight, I was determined to bridge the gap between betrayal and forgiveness. Helena arrived first, her presence as imposing as it was fragile. She moved quietly into the room, the habitual perfection of her attire clashing with an unmistakable vulnerability in her eyes. Moments later, Erik stepped in, his face etched with sorrow and regret. His usual calm was replaced by a tremor that spoke of years of burdened secrets finally catching up with him. There, in the heart of my family's sanctum, the three of us stood on the precipice of irreversible change. Breaking the forced silence, I said I can no longer live in the shadow of secrets or let the past dictate the shape of my tomorrow. I have spent countless sleepless nights piecing together our history, and every finding has shattered the life I thought I knew. My voice trembled, but it carried a strength I hadn't felt in weeks. I need to know why you chose silence and deceit over the truth. Helena's eyes welled with tears, as if the years of concealing her past had finally become too heavy to bear. "Anya," she whispered, "I never meant to deceive you. In my youth, I loved fiercely, so fiercely, that I believed hiding that love was the only way to protect you from the inevitable fallout. I believed that by burying that passion, I could build a future of stability." Her confession was soft, almost inaudible, but every word hit me like a gust of bitter wind. I inhaled sharply, feeling the sting of those words. "But Mother, your silence built a wall between us that I now find nearly impossible to scale. I trusted you implicitly. How was I to know that the story you told me was only one chapter of a far more complicated history? The room felt charged, every eye, a mirror reflecting back sorrow, regret, and the ghosts of decisions past. Erik then mustered the courage to speak, his voice thick with remorse. "Anya, every day I lived with that secret. I feared it would destroy us if you ever learned the truth. I believed that by hiding my true identity, I was sparing you the pain and dishonor of a legacy I never chose. I was wrong. I see that now, as your hurt is as real as the love we once shared." His eyes, red-rimmed with unshed tears, searched mine for any sign of forgiveness. For a long, aching moment, silence pressed upon us once more. I felt the gamut of emotions surge like tidal waves, betrayal, sorrow, and a deep, gnawing loneliness that came from discovering the fragility behind every facade. In that fragile quiet, I struggled with the enormity of our shared suffering. The revelation that Erik was not simply a man I loved, but also a vessel of a painful family secret, forced me to reconsider every memory, every whispered promise that had defined our union. I realized then that forgiveness was not about erasing the betrayal, but about reclaiming the power to shape my future. "I forgive you both." I finally said, my voice resolute yet tinged with sadness, not because what you did is acceptable, but because I refuse to let your mistakes define who I am. There was no dramatic catharsis in that statement, only a quiet, hard-won acceptance of the truth and the mandate to move forward. Helena's trembling hands reached out, and for a moment we embraced the touch, bittersweet, steeped in years of regret and longing for what could have been. Erik, still standing by the window, seemed to shrink into himself as if trying to vanish the ghost of his hidden past. I looked at them both, recognizing that the people I once admired as paragons of strength had been slowly undone by their need to shield me from an unbearable truth. That night, I sat alone in the aftermath, the quiet now filled only by the occasional sigh of the ancient building settling into the cold night, the echo of Helena's whispered apologies and Erik's broken confessions mingled with the distant patter of rain. I wrestled with the notion of forgiveness. Could forgiveness be the path to healing, even as the wounds remained? I realized that forgiveness was not a return to what once was. It was an acceptance of what had transpired and a deliberate choice to build something new from the wreckage. I spent days wandering the rain-soaked streets of Berlin, a city that had witnessed the stylistic convergence of past grandeur and present decay. I found solace at the banks of the River Spree, where I would sit and let the murmurs of the water soothe my turbulent thoughts. With each passing moment, an inner resolve grew. I could not undo the damage, but I could choose how it shaped me. My future, my identity as an architect of both buildings and my own life depended on the truth that had been unearthed and on the courage to face it head-on. In the quiet of a drizzly afternoon, I met with Lena in our favorite little bistro. Over coffee, the conversation turned to forgiveness and the arduous path of healing. Forgiveness is not forgetting. Anya, Lena said, her voice steady and reassuring. It's acknowledging the pain, learning from it, and then choosing to walk forward with the wisdom you've gained. Your ability to forgive does not weaken you. It builds you into something more resilient. Her words, like carefully chiseled stone, lent structure to the chaos of my emotions. I began to notice changes within myself. The raw, unfiltered anger that had once burned fiercely was now tempered by a somber clarity that came only from facing the darkest truths of my past. I started to channel this newfound strength into my work, designing spaces that embraced imperfection as much as they celebrated beauty. Each architectural blueprint became a personal manifesto, a declaration that even the most shattered foundations could be rebuilt with honest effort and unyielding determination. There were moments when the memory of betrayal threatened to halt my progress. Late at night, in the quiet hum of my studio, the thoughts of hidden secrets and manipulated truths would creep in. I remembered the first time I read Helena's old love letter hidden in the attic, and the subsequent revelations that chiseled away at the trust I had placed in the people I loved. And yet I discovered that I could acknowledge that pain without letting it define the entirety of my being. Forgiveness thus became not a spontaneous act, but a gradual transformation. I began to understand that while I might never fully reconcile with the reality of our shared past, I could choose to live in a way that honored my truth. I forgave Helena for her silence, recognizing that even the most painful deceptions often stem from a desire to protect. I forgave Erik for the burden he chose to carry in hopes of shielding me from that same wound. Yet I also acknowledged that the shadows of those betrayals would always linger, subtle scars etched into the fabric of my existence. One evening, several weeks after our confrontation, I revisited the family parlor alone. I walked slowly along the corridor lined with portraits of ancestors whose lives, too, had been riddled with secrets and regrets. I traced a finger over one particular image, a portrait of my grandmother who, like Helena, had faced her own share of unspoken sorrow. In that moment, I felt a profound connection to the legacy of imperfection that bound us all. I understood that while forgiveness might not erase the past, it could transform the pain into a stepping stone, a reminder of the strength required to continue building a future. As the dusk deepened into night, I sat by the window and penned down a letter to my future self. It was not a refusal to remember, but rather a promise, a commitment to honor every emotion that had brought me to this crossroads. I wrote, "I forgive not because I must, but because I choose to. I will always carry these scars as proof of my resilience, and each one will remind me that from the deepest wounds, the most beautiful rebuilds can emerge." The act of writing became a quiet ritual of letting go not of the hurt, but of the powerless grip it once held over me.